A man in a simple suit entered the Golden Ballroom. Nobody looked at him, nobody greeted him, and when they demanded respect, they spilled wine on his chest. Laughter filled the air. He didn't scream. He just left in silence. But what they didn't know was the power that man held in his hands, a power that in minutes was going to change everything. $800 million disappeared with a single call, and the humiliation turned into justice, like if this touched something in you. It's more than a click. It's recognizing that dignity is priceless. Comment how you think this story will end, and if you haven't subscribed yet, it costs you nothing, but for us, it means the whole world. Thank you for being here. Park Avenue, New York City, glowed under the November lights. The Real High-On Hotel rose like a fortress of glass and marble, its revolving doors shining like mirrors under the spotlights. Inside, 200 black-tie guests celebrated what the media called the contract of the century, $800 million in foreign investment that would transform the future of American quantum technology. Jalen Rivers arrived at 8 o'clock sharp, without escort or fanfare. He crossed the sidewalk wet from the recent rain, the sound of his leather shoes softly echoing against the pavement. He wore a simple, unbranded navy blue suit, the kind of garment that could be bought in any neighborhood store. His tie was dark, discreet, the watch on his left wrist. Neither shone nor showed off. At 52, Jalen had learned that true power needs no announcement. The hotel entrance was flanked by 2 private security guards, tall men in black suits and earpieces. One of them, with a square jaw and a perpetual frown, raised his hand when Jalen approached the door. "Excuse me, sir. Do you have an invitation?" Jalen stopped, unfazed. From the inner pocket of his jacket, he pulled out a white envelope with gold edges. He extended it without saying a word. The guard took it, opened it with deliberate slowness, examining every detail as if looking for a forgery. His eyes scanned the printed name, then he observed Jalen up and down. The modest suit, the worn tips of his shoes, the calm, dark-skinned face. "Are you with the catering staff?" the other guard asked, stepping forward. "No," Jalen replied in a measured, neutral voice. The first guard returned the invitation with a reluctant gesture. "All right, you may go in." But his tone was not one of welcome, but of surveillance. As Jalen walked through the revolving doors, he heard the murmur between the 2 guards, words he couldn't distinguish but whose disdain floated in the air. The lobby of the Real High-On Hotel was a cathedral of opulence. The vaulted ceiling was decorated with gold and ivory frescoes, and 3 enormous chandeliers hung like suspended constellations. The Italian marble floor reflected the silhouettes of the guests walking around with champagne glasses in hand, laughing with that artificial laughter that characterizes celebrating elites. Jalen walked towards the grand ballroom, following the discreet signs in golden cursive letters. Nobody stopped him, but nobody greeted him either. Guests passed him like streams of water around a rock, without collision, but without acknowledging his presence. A woman in a scarlet dress and pearl necklace clutched her Chanel bag to her chest as she passed him, her eyes avoiding visual contact. 2 men in tuxedos interrupted their conversation to watch him pass, exchanging glances loaded with silent meaning. The entrance to the ballroom was guarded by a young woman in a cream-colored pantsuit, with an electronic tablet in her hands. She checked the list, found Jalen's name and nodded mechanically, but without smiling. She pointed inside with a quick gesture, like someone swatting a fly. "Go ahead." Jalen entered. The grand ballroom was a universe of its own. The walls were upholstered in wine-colored velvet, and the immense windows let the New York nightlights be seen like a blanket of earthly stars. In the center, 50 round tables dressed in white and gold surrounded a polished wooden dance floor. On the stage at the back, a chamber orchestra performed a Vivaldi concerto with impeccable precision. The guests were a catalogue of power: tech executives, finance ministers, heirs to century-old fortunes, figures from American entertainment, foreign ambassadors. They all conversed in closed circles, glass in hand, practiced smile. The air smelled of expensive perfume, mixed with the faint aroma of smoked salmon and truffles circulating on silver trays. Jalen walked slowly towards one of the side columns, away from the center of attention. He wasn't looking for the spotlight. He never had. He observed the stage where a well-known, tanned, white-smiling TV host adjusted his microphone while leafing through note cards. A young waiter passed with a tray of glasses. Jalen raised his hand to take one, but the waiter sped up without stopping as if he hadn't seen him. Another waiter approached from the opposite side. This time Jalen made no gesture. He simply waited. Around him, conversations flowed in Spanish, English, French. Laughter erupted in controlled bursts. A woman with platinum hair and a tight black dress looked at him from her table, frowned, and whispered something in the ear of her companion, a man with a carefully trimmed beard. Both looked away, simultaneously, as if Jalen were part of the faulty decor. Then from the stage the host gently tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for our hosts for this historic evening, Robert and Veronica Hale, founders of Hale Quantum Systems." The orchestra stopped its melody. The spotlights turned towards the side stairs of the stage, and they appeared. Robert Hale was a 48-year-old man, blonde hair slicked back with gel, a firm jaw, and blue eyes that sparkled with the confidence of someone who has conquered entire markets. He wore a black Italian designer tuxedo, platinum cufflinks on his sleeves. He walked with long strides, chest puffed out, one hand in his pocket. Veronica Hale, his wife, was a woman of calculated beauty. Brown hair pulled back in an elegant bun, artificially tanned skin, lips red as rubies. Her silver dress shimmered under the lights, tight in all the right places, with a discreet but sufficient neckline to remind of her presence. Diamond necklace, matching bracelet, 12-centimeter heels. The ballroom erupted in applause. Robert raised both hands in a sign of victory, smiling like an emperor at his coronation. Veronica waved her fingers with studied grace, her smile as perfect as a magazine photograph. Thank you all," Robert said into the microphone, his deep voice filling the space. "Tonight we celebrate not just a contract, but the future. $800 million that will change the way America competes in the quantum field. And all thanks to the vision of an extraordinary investor who prefers to remain in the anonymity." Applause again. Veronica took the microphone. "We are deeply grateful. This investment will not only save jobs, but create thousands more. New York will be the nerve center of tomorrow's technology." More applause, toasts, raised glasses, flashing cameras. Jalen remained by his column, motionless, observing. His eyes showed no emotion, only attention. Robert and Veronica came down from the stage to mingle with the guests, receiving congratulations, calculated hugs, and exaggerated praise. They moved like fish in their bowl, enjoying every second of adoration. The classical music returned, this time Mozart. Jalen decided to approach the bar situated at the far left of the ballroom. It was a long black marble counter, attended by 3 bartenders dressed in black. He asked for a glass of sparkling water. The bartender, a young man with slicked back hair, served it without looking him in the eyes. $3, he said in a flat tone. Jalen paid in cash. The bartender did not say thank you. While he drank, a man in a pearl-grey suit approached the bar, talking loudly and irritably on the phone. He hung up abruptly and stood next to Jalen, drumming his fingers on the marble. Then he turned his head, looked at Jalen sideways, and something in his brain clicked wrongly. He snapped his fingers twice, like calling a dog. "Hey, you, another glass. Of Moet for table 7. And fast, please." Jalen stopped drinking. He turned his head slowly, meeting the man's eyes. He said nothing. He just looked at him. The man frowned. "Did you hear me? Table 7. Moet Imperial." One of the bartenders intervened from the other end. "Sir, he doesn't work here." The man blinked, confused, then annoyed. He mumbled something unintelligible and walked away without apologizing. Jalen returned to his water. The bartender avoided his gaze. From the center of the ballroom, Veronica Hale had noticed the exchange. Something about Jalen's presence caught her attention. Perhaps it was the contrast. All the other guests moved in flocks, but that man remained alone. Perhaps it was the clothes, or the color of his skin in a sea of white American faces. She said something in her husband's ear. Robert followed the direction of her gaze, found Jalen by the bar, and his expression changed. His eyes narrowed. He said something back to Veronica, who smiled with that smile people use when they are about to correct a perceived mistake. Robert Hale began to walk towards Jalen. Veronica followed 2 steps behind, champagne glass in hand, shining like a queen inspecting her domains. Robert stopped in front of Jalen with his hands in his pockets, his head slightly tilted, a superior smile on his lips. "Excuse me, buddy," he said in perfect English, but a condescending tone. "Are you lost?" Jalen carefully placed his glass of water on the bar. He turned fully towards Robert unhurriedly. His face remained serene, his eyes calm like a windless lake. "No," he simply replied. Robert laughed, a brief nasal laugh. "It's just—" He looked at Veronica, then back at Jalen. "This is a private event. Very private. And He made a gesture with his hand, pointing to Jalen's suit. "Your attire doesn't exactly scream VIP guest, you understand?" Veronica stepped forward, her gardenia perfume invading the space. "What my husband is kindly trying to say is that perhaps you made a mistake. Are you staff? Because if you are, the service area is in the back." Jalen did not respond immediately. He watched them both with the patience of someone who has witnessed this scene 1,000 times in different forms, in different cities, with different faces but identical scripts. "I have an invitation," he finally said, his voice low but firm. Robert laughed louder this time. "An invitation? Who invited you?" "The catering service." Veronica covered her mouth with her hand, feigning surprise at her husband's comment, but her eyes sparkled with cruel amusement. Some nearby guests began to turn, attracted by Robert's raised tone. "Look," Robert continued, puffing out his chest, "I don't want to be rude, but this is an event for investors, executives, people of a certain level. I don't know how you got that invitation, but clearly there was a mistake." Jalen put his hands in his pants pockets. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes did not blink. "There was no mistake." "Oh, no?" Robert crossed his arms. "Then tell me, what exactly are you doing here? What do you do for a living?" "I invest." The word fell like a stone in still water. Robert and Veronica exchanged a look loaded with disbelief and barely contained mockery. "You invest?" Veronica repeated, pronouncing each syllable with exaggerated slowness. "In what? In the lottery?" Robert burst out laughing. Veronica joined him. Several guests around them laughed too, not knowing exactly why, but joining the energy of their hosts. A waiter passed by with a tray. Robert stopped him with an imperious gesture. "You, bring a clean towel. This gentleman needs to start working properly if he's going to stay at my event." The confused waiter looked at Jalen, then at Robert. "Sir, Do it," Robert ordered harshly. The waiter quickly walked away, uncomfortable. Veronica approached Jalen more closely, so close that his perfect eyeliner could be seen. "Listen closely, darling," she said. In a soft but cutting voice, "Table 3 needs more wine. Go and serve them, or better yet, go to the kitchen and help wash dishes. No one will question your presence there." Jalen did not move. He did not step back. He did not raise his voice. He simply held Veronica's gaze with a calm that seemed to infuriate her more. "I don't work here," he repeated. Robert lost his patience. His face reddened. "You know what? I've had enough of this. If you won't cooperate, I'm going to teach you your place." Robert Hale took a glass of red wine from a nearby waiter's tray. The glass was fine crystal, the wine a Rioja Reserve of deep ruby color. He raised it to his chest height, looking at Jalen with a mixture of contempt and anticipated satisfaction. "This," he said loudly so that the surrounding guests would hear, "is what happens when someone doesn't know their place." And without warning, he tilted the glass and poured the entire contents over Jalen's chest. The liquid fell in a slow arc, splattering the dark tie, soaking the white shirt under the suit, sliding down the navy blue jacket. Red drops splashed the marble floor. The sour smell of wine filled the air. The ballroom fell silent. The music continued to play, but conversations stopped like waves hitting an invisible wall. Heads turned, eyes widened. Some guests instinctively took out their phones. Others simply watched with the morbid fascination of someone witnessing an accident. Jalen did not scream. He did not curse. He did not raise his hands. He simply closed his eyes for a second, feeling the cold wine slide down his skin, soaking his clothes. Then he opened his eyes, slowly ran a hand across his face to wipe away a few drops that had reached his cheek, and adjusted his jacket sleeve with an almost mechanical gesture. Veronica let out a sharp giggle, covering her mouth with her hand. "Oh my God, Robert, I think you overdid it." But her tone was not of reproach, but of complicity. Some guests laughed, nervously. Others looked away, uncomfortable but not intervening. Robert returned the empty glass to a stunned waiter and shook his hands, as if he had just touched something dirty. "Now you know where you stand," he said firmly. "In my world, people like you don't enter through the front door, and if you do, you quickly learn to leave through the back." Veronica added with poisonous sweetness, "I hope the lesson serves you well, darling. Next time, dress appropriately. Or better yet, don't come." Jalen looked at both of them in silence for 3 seconds that seemed eternal. Then, without a word, he turned around and walked towards the exit. His steps echoed softly on the wine-soaked marble. Nobody tried to stop him. Nobody offered him help. Nobody said anything. When the grand ballroom door closed behind him, conversation slowly resumed, first in murmurs, then in forced laughter. The orchestra restarted its melody. Robert and Veronica returned to the center of the ballroom, receiving pats on the shoulder and knowing smiles. But at the back of the room, near one of the columns, a man with a press badge checked his phone. He had just uploaded a short video to social media. 30 seconds of the moment, the wine fell on Jalen. The title read, "Investor Humiliated at Hale Quantum Event." In 5 minutes, it had 1,000 views. Jalen walked through the carpeted hallway towards the elevators, his suit dripping wine in small drops that stained the beige carpet. The hotel's air conditioning gave him chills upon contact with the damp clothes. He could feel the fabric sticking to his skin, the acidic smell of the Rioja mixing with his own sweat. A hotel employee, a young man in a grey uniform, saw him pass and opened his mouth to offer help. But something in Jalen's expression, serene, controlled, absolutely impenetrable, stopped him. The young man closed his mouth and looked down. The elevator arrived with a soft ding. Jalen entered. The doors closed. In the solitude of the polished steel cabin, surrounded by mirrors that multiplied his soaked image, he took his cell phone from the inner pocket of his jacket. Fortunately, the wine hadn't reached that pocket. It was an iPhone without a case, clean screen, black background. He unlocked it with his fingerprint and dialed a number from memory. 3 rings. Immediate answer. Rivers. The voice on the other end was feminine, professional, with a British accent. "Mr. Rivers, is everything all right?" Jalen spoke in English, his voice low but every word cutting like glass. "Withdraw the offer immediately." There was a brief pause. "The complete offer, sir." "Complete. Block all channels, contact the legal teams. I want an official statement in the next 10 minutes, announcing the cancellation of the agreement with Hale Quantum Systems. Reason: irreconcilable differences in corporate values." "Understood, sir. Anything else?" Jalen looked at his reflection in the elevator mirror. The ruined blue suit, the shirt, transparent with wine, the disheveled tie, but his eyes remained calm. "Freeze the bridge accounts that we opened for the initial transfer. Notify all secondary partners that we are pulling out cash immediately. And, Margaret?" "Yes, sir?" "I want every financial outlet to know why." "It will be a pleasure, Mr. Rivers." He hung up. The elevator reached the ground floor. The doors opened to the lobby, still brilliant, still full of luxury, still oblivious to the earthquake that was about to begin. Jalen crossed the lobby without looking back. The guards at the entrance saw him leave and said nothing. One of them smiled smugly. Outside, the New York night welcomed him with a cold breeze. Jalen breathed deeply, letting the air fill his lungs. Then he walked towards his car, a silver Mercedes E-Class parked on a side street. He took off his soaked jacket and threw it onto the back seat. He started the engine and drove away slowly, without haste. Inside the Real High-On Hotel, in the grand ballroom, the celebration continued. Robert Hale had just finished an impromptu toast about the power of maintaining high standards. Veronica laughed with a group of executive wives. The orchestra played Beethoven. And then everything changed. The first sign was subtle. The event host, still on the stage, touched his earpiece with a confused expression, then worried, then alarmed. He apologized into the microphone and quickly went down the stairs towards the event director, a bald man in a black suit who was checking his tablet with a frown. They exchanged brief words. The event director visibly paled. He raised his hand and called one of the assistants, a young man with headphones and a clipboard. He showed him his tablet screen. The young man nodded urgently and ran towards the technical control room. The music continued. The guests continued to converse. But on the margins of the room, phones began to vibrate. A German investment fund executive checked his email and frowned. He opened the message, read it twice, then showed the screen to his colleague. Both looked at each other with grave expressions. A woman from the European Commission received a notification from Bloomberg. She read the headline, and her face lost color. She looked for the Secretary of the Treasury, who was at the main table, and began to walk quickly towards him. A financial journalist from Reuters, who had been invited to cover the contract signing, checked his Twitter feed, and his eyes widened. He began to type frantically on his phone. The music ended. Automatic applause. The orchestra prepared the next piece. But before they could start, the host went up to the stage again, this time without a smile. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice sounded tense, "I regret to inform you that we have received an urgent notification." The ballroom fell silent. Robert Hale, who was talking to a Canadian ambassador, turned towards the stage with irritation. "The contract signing scheduled for tonight has been suspended." A murmur of confusion ran through the room like a wave. Veronica put her glass on the table, her smile vanishing. "It must be a mistake," Robert said loudly, walking towards the stage. "A technical misunderstanding." But the event director went up the stairs and whispered something in his ear. Robert frowned, then shook his head. "That's impossible." The director showed him his tablet. Robert read the screen. His face went from skepticism to disbelief, then to pure horror. "What is going on?" Veronica asked from below, her voice sharp. Robert did not answer. He took out his own phone and started making calls. The first was not answered. Neither was the second. On the third, someone answered, and Robert moved away from the microphone, speaking urgently while gesticulating violently. The guests began to check their phones massively. Notifications arrived in an avalanche. Press releases, financial alerts, internal company messages, and something else. A video circulating rapidly on social media. A Texan businessman found it first. It was the video of the moment Robert spilled the wine on Jalen, filmed from a side angle. 30 seconds of public humiliation. It already had 50,000 views, and the comments were exploding. "Who is that man? What disgusting people. This is pure racism. Does anyone know his name?" And then, one of the comments changed everything. "That's Jalen Rivers, the phantom investor." The name began to circulate like electricity. Jalen Rivers, Jalen Rivers. The Jalen Rivers, it can't be. Yes, it is, my God. A member of the Hale Quantum Board of Directors, a 60-year-old Danish man named Henrik Olsen, saw the video on his phone and felt the floor disappear beneath his feet. He knew that face. He had been in 3 video conferences with that man over the last 6 months, confidential negotiations, investment agreements, the mysterious investor who was going to save the company. He stood up so abruptly that his chair fell backward. He walked directly towards Robert, who was still on the phone, now shouting in English. "Robert!" Henrik grabbed his arm tightly. "Tell me you didn't do what I think you did." Robert turned, the phone still to his ear. "What are you talking about?" Henrik showed him the video on his screen. "That man, the one with the wine. Who is he?" Robert looked at the screen in confusion. "I don't know. Someone who sneaked in. We kicked him out." Henrik closed his eyes and swore in Danish. "That is Jalen Rivers." Robert blinked. "Who?" "Jalen Rivers," Henrik shouted, losing all composure. "The investor, our investor, the $800 million man." Color drained from Robert's face like water down a drain. His phone slipped from his hand and fell to the floor with a crack. Veronica, who had heard everything from below, ran up to the stage, stumbling in her heels. "What did you say?" Her voice was a sharp whisper. Henrik showed them his own phone, which had a profile photo of Jalen. From a Financial Times article, "Jalen Rivers, the invisible investor who moves billions." It was the same man, the same calm face. The blue suit in the photo was different, but the eyes were unmistakable. Veronica staggered. Robert held her, but he himself seemed about to collapse. "No, it can't be," he stammered. "Nobody told us he was coming tonight." "Because he wanted to remain anonymous, you idiot." Henrik almost spat the words. "That was the whole point. He wanted to discreetly assess the event. And you... He didn't finish the phrase. It wasn't necessary. At that moment, Robert's phone, still on the floor, began to vibrate violently. The screen displayed, "Urgent, CFO." Henrik picked it up and answered, putting it on speakerphone. "Robert, are you there?" The CFO's voice sounded desperate. "Yes, it's me. Everything fell apart. Everything. The contract is officially cancelled. Rivers withdrew the full offer. He froze the accounts. And there's more?" "More?" Robert repeated mechanically. "He's issuing a public statement explaining why. Incompatible corporate values, disrespectful treatment. Robert, he mentioned tonight's incident. The video is everywhere. The financial press has already picked it up. Bloomberg, Reuters, Financial Times, everyone." Silence. Henrik looked at Robert and Veronica with a mixture of fury and despair. "We've lost everything," the CFO said through the speaker. "Secondary investors are pulling out. The banks want explanations. The stock is going to collapse when the market opens Monday. Robert, this is the end." The call cut off. The silence on the stage was sepulchral. Robert stood paralyzed, looking at the phone as if it were a strange object. Veronica put both hands to her mouth, her eyes shining with tears that hadn't yet fallen. Down in the ballroom, chaos began to take shape. The guests huddled in groups, all looking at their phones, all talking at once. The wine video had surpassed 200,000 views. The comments were an avalanche of indignation. "This is disgusting. Treating someone like that because of their appearance. And this guy is CEO? What a disgrace for America. Rivers had every right to cancel. I would do the same. Arrogance has a price, and Robert Hale just paid it." A journalist from the New York Times climbed onto the stage without asking permission, microphone in hand. "Mr. Hale, can you confirm that the man in the video is Jalen Rivers, the cancelled contract investor?" Robert did not respond. He just stared blankly. "Is it true that you personally spilled wine on him without knowing who he was?" Veronica stepped forward, trying to regain some composure. It was a terrible misunderstanding. We had no idea." "A misunderstanding?" the journalist interrupted. "Mrs. Hale, in the video you tell him to go to the kitchen. You order him to serve wine. How do you explain that?" Veronica opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her mind desperately searched for an answer that didn't exist. Because the truth was simple and brutal. They had humiliated a man based solely on his appearance, on the color of his skin, on his modest clothing. And that man turned out to be exactly who they couldn't afford to offend. Henrik Olsen took the host's microphone, gently pushing the journalist aside. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice trembled with contained anger, "I deeply regret this evening. As a member of the Hale Quantum Systems Board, I assume partial responsibility for not having established clearer protocols. However, I must state that the actions of Mr. and Mrs. Hale were completely personal and do not reflect the values of our company." Robert glared at him. "Henrik, what are you doing?" "What I should have done years ago. Getting away from this disaster before it drags me down." Henrik got off the stage, took out his phone, and started dialing. "I am submitting my resignation, effective immediate." Another board member, a silver-haired German woman, stood up from her table. "I resign too." A third raised his hand. Likewise. In 15 minutes, the Hale Quantum Systems Board of Directors disintegrated. One after another, the key executives left the ballroom, some without even saying goodbye. The guests began to leave in waves, uncomfortable, ashamed of having been witnesses, some even accomplices with their laughter. The grand ballroom, which an hour earlier had been a temple of opulence and celebration, was emptying like a sinking ship. The orchestra put away their instruments in silence. The waiters began to collect half-full glasses. The golden lights now seemed too bright, exposing every crack, every stain, every mistake. Robert and Veronica remained on the stage, alone, surrounded by silence and the remnants of their own arrogance. Veronica began to cry, her makeup running in black streaks down her cheeks. Robert hugged her, but his own hands trembled uncontrollably. "What have we done?" she whispered against his chest. Robert had no answer. For the first time in his life, the man who thought he controlled everything realized that he had destroyed his empire in 30 seconds of gratuitous cruelty. It was 3 in the morning when Robert and Veronica arrived at their penthouse in the Upper East Side. The 500-square-meter apartment, with views of Central Park, was silent. The automatic lights turned on upon their arrival, revealing Italian marble floors, contemporary artwork on the walls, Designer furniture that cost more than the annual salary of an average family. All of that, which hours earlier represented their success, now seemed empty. Soulless objects in a museum of vanity. Veronica took off her heels and dropped them to the floor. She walked barefoot to the kitchen, opened the refrigerator and took out a bottle of white wine. She filled a glass to the brim and drank without breathing. Robert collapsed onto the leather sofa, still in his tuxedo, the tie loose around his neck. His phone had been ringing non-stop during the drive. He had silenced it, but the notifications kept coming. Emails from enraged partners, messages from lawyers, news alerts, screenshots of the video that now had millions of views. The hashtag Jalen Rivers was trending worldwide on Twitter. Also, Hail Quantum Fail and Millionaire Karma. Veronica joined him on the sofa, glass in hand, eyes swollen. "How did this happen?" she asked in a broken voice. "This morning was. How were we supposed to—" "No, he came dressed like a normal man?" Robert interrupted her, his voice heavy with bitterness. "That's the problem, Veronica. We assumed his clothes defined his worth. We assumed his skin made him less. We assumed we had the right to treat him like garbage because in our world, in our little glass bubble, we thought we were the only ones who mattered." It was the first time Robert had said those words out loud, the first time he admitted, even obliquely, the fundamental truth of what they had done. Veronica sobbed. "But it was a mistake, a terrible mistake, yes, but a mistake. People make mistakes. Doesn't that deserve a second chance?" Robert looked at her with tired eyes. "Would we have given it to him? If he had been rude to us, if he had spilled wine on you, would we have given him a second chance? Or would we have called security, had him expelled, perhaps even sued?" Veronica did not answer because she knew the answer. Robert's phone vibrated. It was an email from the company's main bank. Subject, urgent review of credit lines. He didn't even open it. He knew what it said. The banks were withdrawing support, protecting their own reputation before the ship completely sank. "We have to talk to him," Veronica said, suddenly straightening up. "We have to apologize, explain to him, beg him if necessary. Robert, we can still fix this." Robert shook his head slowly. "Veronica, you had wine poured on his chest. You humiliated him in front of 200 people. The video has millions of views. What apology could possibly suffice? But we have to try," she cried, her voice cracking. "What other choice do we have? Stay here and watch everything fall apart? Our company, our reputation, our future. Robert, we will lose everything. Everything." Her words echoed in the empty apartment. Robert rubbed his face with both hands, feeling the weight of every wrong decision he had made in the last 10 years. Every ethical shortcut, every employee treated as disposable, every person ignored because they didn't fit into their golden circle. "All right," he finally said. "Tomorrow. Tomorrow, we will try to talk to him." Veronica nodded, clinging to that minimal hope like a shipwreck survivor to a floating log. She leaned against Robert's shoulder, and they both stayed there on the $15,000 leather sofa, looking at the New York lights through the windows, wondering how they had fallen so fast and so far. Outside, the city slept. But on social media, the world was awake, dissecting every second of the video, debating privilege and power, subtle racism, and instant karma. Jalen Rivers had become an involuntary symbol, the man who refused to accept mistreatment, who had the power to respond without violence, only by withdrawing his dignity and his money from unworthy hands. And Robert and Veronica Hale had become another kind of symbol. Arrogance punished, cruelty rewarded with ruin, the reminder that respect is not granted by titles, but by actions. Monday dawned grey over New York. Low clouds covered the sky like a blanket of lead, and a fine drizzle fogged the penthouse windows. Robert woke up on the sofa, his neck stiff and the bitter taste of defeat in his mouth. Veronica slept curled up on the other end, still wearing the silver dress, her makeup turned into dark smudges. At 7 in the morning, Robert's phone started ringing. They were not social calls. They were avalanches, lawyers, accountants, department heads, journalists, even some minor shareholders demanding explanations. He turned off the phone. Then he turned it back on, because not doing so would be worse. The morning financial news was devastating. When the stock market opened, Hale Quantum Systems shares fell 67% in the first 2 hours of trading. Trading algorithms detected the collapse and automatically sold, accelerating the fall. By 10 in the morning, the company had lost 4/5 of its market value. Bloomberg published an article, "The Most Expensive Wine in History: How 30 Seconds of Arrogance Destroyed a Tech Empire." The New York Times headlined, "Jalen Rivers and the Price of Dignity: Lessons from a Cancelled Contract." Financial Times was more direct. "Hail Quantum Collapses After Racist Incident at NYC Event." Every article included the video. Every article included screenshots of Robert and Veronica's faces at the moment of the humiliation. And every article contrasted those images with professional photos of Jalen Rivers, a serious but kind-looking man with an impeccable career built on strategic investments in sustainable technology, education in Africa, and renewable energy projects. The journalists had done their homework. Jalen Rivers was not just rich, he was respected. He had donated millions to humanitarian causes. He had funded schools in Uganda and hospitals in Senegal. He had invested in startups led by women and minorities. He was, by all accounts, a man of unwavering principles, and Robert and Veronica had treated him like garbage. At noon, Veronica finally woke up. She showered, dressed in comfortable clothes, jeans and a cashmere sweater, and sat down in front of her computer. She spent 2 hours looking for information about Jalen Rivers, where he lived, how to contact him, where he might be. She found no public address, but she did find a reference in a magazine article about his modest residence in the outskirts of New York, where he prefers rural tranquility to urban bustle. That was something. She called a contact at the City Hall, a woman who owed her favors from previous charity events. After 20 minutes of pleading and promises, she obtained an approximate address, a residential area near Bedford Hills, upstate. "We have to go now," she told Robert, who was in his study surrounded by legal papers. Robert looked up, his eyes bloodshot. "Go where?" "To his house. To Rivers' house. We have the address." Robert shook his head. "Veronica, we can't just show up at his door like desperate stalkers." "And what other choice do we have?" Veronica raised her voice. "Robert, in 3 days we won't have a company. Lawyers say creditors can force liquidation. We will lose everything, the company, this apartment, our savings, everything. Our only hope is to convince him to reconsider." "He won't reconsider," Robert said tiredly. "Why would he? We gave him every reason not to. Then we will humble ourselves. We will kneel if necessary." Veronica approached, taking his hands. "Robert, please, we have to try. I can't accept our life ending like this. I can't." Robert looked at his wife. He saw the tears in her eyes, the genuine fear, the desperation, and he knew she was right, not because they were going to succeed, but because not trying would mean living the rest of their lives wondering, what if? "All right," he sighed. "Let's go." They dressed in simple clothes, avoiding any ostentation. Robert chose a grey sweater and dark pants. Veronica tied her hair back in a ponytail. No jewelry, no excessive makeup. They wanted to look humble. They wanted to look human. They got into the Mercedes and drove north, leaving behind the skyscrapers of the financial district, the luxury stores of Fifth Avenue, the trendy restaurants where they used to have lunch. They drove towards the outskirts, where houses were spaced out, where gardens replaced concrete, where life seemed slower and simpler. They found the address after 40 minutes of searching, a 2-story Mediterranean-style house, white walls, orange-tiled roof, surrounded by pine trees, and a small, well-kept garden. There were no ostentatious gates or security guards, just a simple mailbox next to a gravel path that led to the dark wooden door. Robert parked the car in the street. Both sat in silence for a full minute, gathering courage. "Are you sure about this?" Robert asked. Veronica nodded, although her face was pale. "We have no choice." They got out of the car. They walked along the gravel path, each step sounding too loud in the afternoon silence. They reached the door. Robert raised his hand, and after one last deep breath, rang the bell. They waited. Seconds that felt like hours. Then, footsteps inside. The door opened. Jalen Rivers was standing in front of them. Jalen wore casual clothes, dark jeans and a plaid flannel shirt, barefoot. His expression showed no surprise at seeing them, as if he had been expecting this visit, as if it were inevitable. His eyes, calm, penetrating, observed them in silence for 3 seconds, that felt like a complete judgment. "Mr. Rivers," Robert began, his voice trembling slightly, "we regret showing up unannounced, but we needed to talk to you." Jalen did not respond immediately. He simply looked at them, first at Robert, then at Veronica. She avoided his gaze, looking at the ground, her hands twisted in front of her body. "Talk?" Jalen finally repeated, his voice low but clear. "Interesting choice of word. The other night you did a lot of talking. I, on the other hand, was more bathed." Veronica visibly flinched at his words. Robert swallowed hard. "You're right. You have every right to be furious. What we did was—" He searched for the right word and couldn't find it. "Unforgivable. Unforgivable," Jalen repeated, tasting the word as if it were bitter wine. "That is a strong word, Mr. Hale. It suggests I shouldn't even listen to what you came to say. Please," Veronica intervened, her voice breaking. We just ask for a few minutes to apologize, to explain." Jalen looked at her attentively. There was something in his expression that was not cruel, but neither was it kind. It was the look of someone who has seen this scene before in different contexts, with different actors, but the same script. "Explain," he asked softly. "Explain why you treated me like a servant. Explain why you assumed my worth was determined by my clothing. Or explain why, when I asked for basic respect, you decided to publicly humiliate me." Each question was a precise needle, finding exactly where it hurt the most. Robert felt his face burn. "There is no explanation," he admitted. "Only excuses, and excuses don't change what we did." Jalen tilted his head slightly, studying him. "At least in that we are honest. Why are you here then?" Veronica took a step forward, her eyes finally meeting Jalen's. "Because we have lost everything. The company is collapsing. Investors fled, partners left. In days we will have nothing, and I understand it completely. We deserve it, but—" Her voice broke. "But there are 200 families working for Hale Quantum. People who had nothing to do with what we did. People with children, with mortgages, with dreams. And they are going to lose their jobs because of our stupidity." It was a calculated argument, appealing to the innocent victims. But there was truth in it too. Jalen knew it. He could see, in Veronica's eyes, that beneath her personal despair, there was at least a spark of genuine concern for those employees. Those 200 families, Jalen said, worked for a company run by people who consider respect optional. That human dignity has exceptions. Do you believe that is a solid foundation for any organization? "No," Robert replied, his voice hoarse. "It is not. And we have been terrible leaders, terrible people. But those employees don't deserve it." "You are right," Jalen accepted. "They don't deserve it. But neither did I deserve to have wine spilled on me, and yet it happened. The world is full of people who don't deserve the suffering they receive, Mr. Hale. The difference is that you had the power to prevent it and chose not to." Veronica began to cry silently, tears rolling down her unmade face. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I am so sorry. We didn't know who you were." And there it was, the phrase Jalen had been waiting for, the honest revelation of the fundamental problem. "Exactly," he said, his voice gaining a sharper edge. "You didn't know who I was. And that, Mrs. Hale, is precisely the problem." Veronica looked up, confused. "The problem? You didn't respect me because you didn't know my name, my bank account, my power. You treated me like trash because you thought you could do it without consequences. But if you had known who I was, would you have treated me differently?" "Yes," Veronica admitted without thinking. "Then you haven't." Understood anything. Jalen took a step back, creating more distance. Respect should not depend on who someone is in a social hierarchy. You shouldn't need to know a person's resume before treating them with basic dignity. The doorman deserves the same respect as the CEO. The waiter deserves the same courtesy as the ambassador. Robert nodded slowly, and for the first time he seemed to genuinely understand. "You are right. Completely right." "Of course I'm right," Jalen replied without arrogance, only weariness. "But being right doesn't solve your problems or mine." There was a long silence. A cold breeze swept through the garden, making the pine trees whisper. Veronica hugged herself, trembling. "Is there anything we can do?" Robert finally asked. "Anything that can change your decision? I'm not asking you to forget, just to consider a second chance." Not for us, for the people who depend on us. Jalen looked at them for a long time. He had considered this conversation. He had anticipated it. He knew they would come, he knew what they would say, he knew how they would feel, and he had decided his answer long before they knocked on his door. "Mr. and Mrs. Hale," he said with calm finality, "the contract is cancelled. Not because I seek revenge, not because I enjoy your suffering, but because trust, once destroyed in that way, cannot be rebuilt with apologies." "But," Veronica began. Jalen raised a hand, stopping her words. "When I signed that preliminary agreement, I was not just investing money. I was investing my reputation, my name, my credibility. Partnering with your company meant endorsing your values, your practices, your vision, and you showed me exactly what those values are." Robert lowered his head. Veronica sobbed harder. "Please, the door is closed," Jalen said firmly but not cruelly. "Not because you don't deserve forgiveness someday, but because that forgiveness does not come with an attached check. You can seek redemption. You can change, you can learn, but that doesn't mean I have to finance your second chance. It was final, absolute, and just." Robert looked up, meeting Jalen's eyes. For the first time in days, there was no calculation in his gaze, no strategy, only acceptance of an undeniable truth. "I understand," he said simply, "and I don't blame you." Veronica turned to her husband, surprised by his tone of surrender, but Robert continued, "We built a company on sand, Mr. Rivers, on appearances and connections, and who knows who, never on real values. And you exposed us in 30 seconds, not because you were cruel, but because you simply withdrew your participation from something that wasn't worth it." Jalen nodded slightly. It was the first sign of acknowledgement he offered. "The structure can be rebuilt," Jalen said. "Buildings can be raised again. But the foundations, those must be solid from the beginning, and your foundations were vanity and contempt disguised as success." Veronica wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "What do we do now?" she asked. Not really to Jalen, but to the air, to the universe, to any force that might have an answer. "That," Jalen replied, "depends entirely on you. You can declare yourselves victims. You can blame the world for being unfair. You can hire lawyers to find legal technicalities. Or you can accept that actions have consequences, that respect is non-negotiable, and that rebuilding lives requires first rebuilding character." Robert put his hands in his pockets, feeling the weight of every word. "You are right, always have been." "It's not about being right," Jalen corrected. "It's about living with integrity, something I learned not by being rich, but by having been poor, by having been on the other side, by having been the man in the cheap suit that people ignored. The difference is that I remembered that lesson when I gained power. You forgot that power exists to be used with responsibility, not with arrogance." There was another long silence. A bird sang from one of the pine trees. The wind moved the dry leaves in the garden. Life continued, indifferent to the human drama unfolding on that threshold. "We thank you for your time," Robert finally said, extending his hand. Jalen looked at it but did not shake it. It was not rejection but boundary setting. Some bridges, once burned, cannot be crossed with a simple handshake. "There is something else you need to understand," Jalen said, his voice dropping a tone. "I didn't ruin your lives. You did. I simply refused to be an accomplice to your downfall. The humiliation you felt when I cancelled the contract was not revenge. It was justice. It was the universe reminding you that no one is too important to treat others with decency." Veronica nodded, finally understanding the fundamental difference. "Is there anything you can teach us?" she asked in a small voice. "Any advice?" Jalen considered the question. He could have closed the door. He could have told them he wasn't their teacher, their therapist, their guide, but he saw something in their desperation that reminded him of moments in his own life when he had needed someone to show him the way. "Walk carefully," he finally said. "The world is smaller than you think. The people you ignore today may be the ones you need tomorrow. The ones you humiliate in private may expose you in public. And the dignity you deny others is the same dignity you will eventually lose yourselves." He paused, looking past them towards the car parked in the street. "And when you rebuild, if you rebuild, do it from humility. Not from wounded ego seeking to reclaim lost glory, but from the genuine recognition that success without humanity is just a facade waiting to collapse. Robert etched every word into his memory. Veronica closed her eyes, letting the meaning penetrate. "Thank you," Robert said, "for listening to us, for the words, for the lesson." "Don't thank me," Jalen replied. "Thank life for being merciful enough to give you this lesson before it was too late to learn anything from it." And with that, Jalen Rivers took a step back and began to close the door. Not violently, not with anger, just with serene finality. "Mr. Rivers," Veronica called out one last time. Jalen stopped, the door open just a few centimeters. "Yes? Will you ever forgive us?" Jalen considered the question. Then he said something Veronica didn't expect. "I already have. Forgiveness is for my own peace, not for your benefit. But forgiveness does not mean forgetting, nor does it mean restoring what was destroyed. It simply means that I will not carry the weight of your mistake in my heart. You, however, will have to carry the consequences in yours." And he closed the door. Robert and Veronica remained on the threshold for a few more seconds, staring at the dark wooden door that now separated them from any possibility of immediate redemption. The sound of their own breaths seemed too loud in the silent garden. Finally, Robert gently touched Veronica's elbow. "Let's go." They walked back along the gravel path, each step sounding like an echo of their defeat. They got into the Mercedes without speaking. Robert started the engine, but didn't move immediately. He stayed there, hands on the steering wheel, looking at Jalen Rivers' modest house through the windshield. "He lives here," Veronica said softly, "with all his money, all his influence, and he chooses to live here, in a simple house. No gates, no guards, like a normal person." "He is not the one who is abnormal," Robert replied. "It is us. We who confused value with price, importance with ostentation." Veronica turned to him. "What do we do now?" Robert put the car in gear and began to drive back towards New York. "We will accept what comes. The company will probably collapse. We will lose the apartment. The savings will go to legal debts, and we will have to start over. But this time," he paused, searching for the right words, "this time, as different people." "Do you think we can change?" Veronica asked, genuinely uncertain. "I don't know," Robert admitted, "but we have to try. Because living as we lived before, that wasn't really living. It was acting in a theater of vanity." He drove in silence for several miles. The outskirts of New York gradually gave way to the city, the buildings growing taller, the traffic increasing. But Robert did not speed up. He was in no hurry to get anywhere. Veronica looked out the window, watching. The people on the streets, an old man walking his dog, a young woman pushing a baby stroller, construction workers taking a coffee break. Normal people living normal lives, no million-dollar dramas, no corporate collapses, just existing. "Do you think they are happier than us?" Veronica asked suddenly. Robert followed her gaze. "Probably, because they haven't confused success with happiness." They reached the penthouse at dusk. The apartment seemed emptier than ever, colder. Veronica made herself a tea and sat on the balcony, watching the city lights turn on one by one. Robert joined her with a glass of whiskey that he barely touched. "Tomorrow I will call the lawyers," Robert said. "I will tell them to proceed with the orderly liquidation. We will try to protect employee payments as much as possible. It will be the least we can do." Veronica nodded. "And I'm going to write a public statement, a real apology. No excuses, just the truth of what we did and why it was wrong." Robert looked at her surprised. "Are you sure?" "The lawyers will say it's legal suicide. We are already legally dead," Veronica replied with a small, bitter smile. "At least let us die with some dignity intact." Robert took her hand. It was the first time in months they had touched with true intimacy, without calculation, without agenda. Just two people sharing a moment of honest vulnerability. "I'm sorry," Robert said, "for dragging you into this, for not being a better man." Veronica squeezed his hand. "I was equally responsible, perhaps more so. I was the one who asked him to serve wine. I was the one who treated him like—" She stopped, unable to finish the sentence. "Like someone less than human," Robert completed softly. "We both did, and we will both pay the price. But perhaps that price is exactly what we needed to pay, to remember who we should be." They stayed on the balcony late into the night, not talking much, just being present. In the distance, they could see the lights of the real Hyon Hotel where everything had begun. The building shone against the night sky, oblivious to the drama it had unleashed, continuing its luxurious existence while the lives around it transformed. Elsewhere in the city, in his modest house surrounded by pine trees, Jalen Rivers read a book in his study. There was no drama in his posture, no sense of victory or satisfaction, only stillness. He had done what he needed to do, said what he needed to say. The rest was up to them. Before sleeping, Jalen looked at his phone. The video already had 15 million views. The comments kept coming, thousands per minute. Some called him a hero, others questioned his harshness, but most understood the fundamental message: respect is not optional, and power is no excuse for cruelty. He turned off the phone and closed his eyes, knowing that tomorrow the sun would rise the same, that life would continue, and that somewhere in New York, two people were learning the hardest lesson of their lives. 3 months later, New York had changed and hadn't changed. The city continued its eternal rhythm, indifferent to the individual dramas of its inhabitants. But for some people, everything was different. Hale Quantum Systems had completed its liquidation. The assets were sold to a German company that retained 70% of the employees. It wasn't the perfect outcome, but it was better than a total collapse. Robert and Veronica had lost their penthouse, their savings, their reputation. In elite circles, they moved to a modest apartment in Queens, a working-class neighborhood where no one knew their names or their scandals. Robert found work as a freelance consultant for small tech startups, earning in a month what he previously earned in an hour. Veronica began teaching English at a local academy, discovering to her surprise that she enjoyed teaching, that there was satisfaction in helping students improve. It wasn't the life they had imagined. It was smaller, humbler, harder, but it was also more real. One February afternoon, Robert was walking through Central Park when he saw a familiar figure sitting on a bench feeding pigeons. He stopped, his heart quickening. It was Jalen Rivers, dressed casually, alone, without entourage or attention. Robert hesitated. He could have walked away. Jalen probably hadn't seen him. But something in him, perhaps newly found courage, perhaps a need for closure, prompted him to approach. "Mr. Rivers," he said softly. Jalen looked up. His expression showed no surprise. He nodded slightly. "Mr. Hale, I don't want to bother you," Robert said quickly. "I just wanted, if you allow me, to tell you something." Jalen pointed to the empty space on the bench. Robert sat down, keeping a respectful distance. "And it was the best thing that could have happened to us," Robert completed, his voice laden with a sincerity that had never existed in his years as an executive. Jalen continued feeding the pigeons, not responding. Immediately, the silence between them was not uncomfortable, it was reflective. "How is your wife?" Jalen finally asked. "Good. Better, actually. She teaches English now. She likes it. She says that for the first time in years she feels useful, not simply decorative." Jalen nodded. "And you?" "Consulting for small startups. I earn little, but I sleep better. It's strange, you know, to have less and feel more complete." "It's not strange," Jalen said. "It's natural. The weight of the ego is heavier than any mortgage." Robert smiled slightly, a smile without pretense. "That night at the hotel I thought you were destroying us. Now I understand that you were freeing us from ourselves." Jalen turned to him, his eyes serene but penetrating. "I didn't free you from anything, Mr. Hale. You chose to free yourselves by accepting the consequences. Many people in your position would have blamed the world, would have hired armies of lawyers, would have launched public relations campaigns to paint themselves as victims. You chose the harder path, honesty." Robert lowered his gaze, observing his own hands. He no longer wore the $30,000 Swiss watch, just a simple Casio that told the correct time, which was all he needed. "I wanted to apologize again," he said, "not to ask for anything. Just so you know that your words that afternoon at your house did not fall on deaf ears. They changed something in me, in us." Jalen remained silent for a moment, then spoke in a soft but firm voice. "Forgiveness, Mr. Hale, is not a one-time event. It is a process. I forgave you months ago because holding on to resentment would have only poisoned me. But the real forgiveness, the one that matters, is the one you must give yourselves, because you will live with those memories forever. The question is not whether I forgive you. It is whether you can forgive yourselves and, more importantly, whether you can use that mistake as a foundation for a better life. That's what we are trying to do, Robert said. Every day. Veronica wrote that public apology. She lost friends, contacts, but she gained peace. And I try to see people now, really see them. Not their titles, not their clothes, not their usefulness to me, just them. Jalen nodded with subtle approval. Then something good came out of something terrible. That is the only way suffering makes sense, when it is transformed into wisdom. Robert stood up, not wanting to overstay Jalen's time. Thank you for listening to me. I didn't expect to find you here, but I'm glad I did. I needed to close this circle. Jalen also stood up, brushing breadcrumbs from his hands. The circle never completely closes, Mr. Hale. It only expands. You will carry this lesson to other places, to other people, and perhaps someday you will prevent someone else from making the same mistake. That is the true value of a difficult experience. He extended his hand. This time Robert shook it. The handshake was firm, brief without drama. Two men recognizing each other as equals, not in status but in humanity. Take care, Mr. Hale, Jalen said. And always remember, the world is smaller than we imagine, but also more merciful than we deserve. Robert nodded, etching those final words into his memory. I will remember. Always. They separated, walking in opposite directions through the park. Robert towards his modest apartment where Veronica was preparing dinner. Jalen towards his car, where he would continue. His day without fanfare, without needing to be recognized, simply being. That night in their small Queens apartment, Robert told Veronica about the encounter. She listened in silence, silent tears rolling down her cheeks. They were not tears of sadness, but of gratitude. Gratitude for having survived their own arrogance, for having found a way back to their humanity, for having a second chance to live correctly. Do you think we can ever make up for what we did? Veronica asked. Robert hugged her. We can't change the past, but we can honor it by living better in the present, by treating every person we meet with the dignity we denied him. That will be our legacy. In the months and years that followed, the wine story at the Real High-On Hotel became an urban legend in New York, then a case study in business schools, then a permanent reminder that power without principles is just tyranny waiting to collapse. The video was never deleted. It remained on the internet, viewed millions of times, shared at conferences on ethical leadership, discussed in forums on human dignity. It became something bigger than Robert, bigger than Veronica, bigger even than Jalen. It became a mirror where people could see their own shortcomings, their own assumptions, their own small cruelties that, accumulated, created a colder world. Jalen Rivers never spoke publicly about the incident after his initial statement. He didn't write a book. He didn't give exclusive interviews. He simply continued his work, investing in projects that mattered, helping communities that needed it, living with the same humility that had characterized him before he became rich. Because for Jalen, that night had not been about victory or revenge. It had been about drawing a line, about demonstrating that dignity was not negotiable, no matter how much money was at stake. And that message, delivered not with violence but with the simple withdrawal of his presence and his investment, resonated louder than any speech could have. Years later, when a journalist finally managed to get a brief interview with Jalen and asked him if he ever regretted cancelling the contract, if the human cost of the lost jobs had haunted him, Jalen replied calmly, "Actions have consequences. That is a fundamental law of the universe. I did not create those consequences. I simply refused to fund a system built on contempt. The jobs were lost, not because I withdrew my money, but because the company was founded on empty values. It would eventually have collapsed anyway. I just accelerated the inevitable." And when asked what lesson he wanted people to take from that experience, Jalen remained silent for a long moment, looking through his study window at the pine trees surrounding his house. Then he spoke, and his words became the perfect closure to a story about dignity, power, and redemption. Treat every person as if their value were infinite, because it is. Not because they can give you something in return, not because they have impressive titles or bloated bank accounts, but because they are human beings, sharing this brief moment of existence with you. Respect is not granted based on convenience. It is granted based on the simple truth that we all deserve to be seen, heard, and treated with dignity. And if you ever forget that, if you ever find yourselves judging someone by their appearance or their position, remember this: the world is smaller than you think, and the person you ignore today could be exactly the one you need most tomorrow. Not because they have power over you, but because in your shared humanity, we all depend on each other. That is the only lesson that matters.